Darkcast Network. Welcome to the dark side of podcasting.
First came love, then came lies, control, and murder. I'm Kai, host of Love and Murder, Heartbreak to Homicide, the true crime podcast where I tell real stories of relationships that were doomed bonds from the start. Reacting with raw honesty, passionate rants, and unfiltered frustration when justice isn't served. I give you new full episodes every Monday with mini cases every Wednesday and Friday. Go to murderandlove.com, that's love and murder backwards, murderandlove.com, where you'll uncover the twisted side of relationships that led to homicide.
Hey everyone, welcome to True Crime California. I'm your host, Cindy, and I'm glad you're here. Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Cindy, the host of True Crime California, and this is Richard Ramirez Part 2. Now, before we get into anything, please just know that I'm a lying liar who lies, and it wasn't intentional. I really thought I'd have this out earlier, but here we are. Life gets in the way, guys. I did my best. I'm so sorry. Also, this is probably going to be a monster Part 2 because I think I actually stopped recording Part 1 a little on the early side. So this is going to be a long one, but I'm not going to break it into 3 parts because God knows we don't need 6 weeks of Richard Ramirez. And with my crazy schedule, I'm not going to get these out any faster. So let's see how long this is, but we're all in it together, guys. I also lied about playing my friend's song. That wasn't a lie so much as I chose. I'm going to play it at the end of this episode because I think it makes more sense to close it out with a song about Richard Ramirez. So anyway, I apologize for lying. Life gets in the way. Or as they say with Jurassic Park, life finds a way. And I found a way to record. It just took a lot fucking longer than I thought it would. So sorry about that, guys. I sound like I'm not sorry, but I really am. I don't mean to make everybody wait. There's just so much that happens in life and work and with kids, and it's hard to find the time. So I do apologize. I'm glad you all are here, like I always say, and I'm excited to discuss this piece of shit and this crazy fucking case. So we're back and we're talking about the piece of shit murderer, Richard Ramirez, otherwise known as the Night Stalker, or sometimes the Night Intruder, although it definitely doesn't have as good of a ring. In part 1, we went over his young life and family, discussed his many head injuries, the potential poisoning he suffered before he was even born, his crazy drug use, and a newer development, which was that he molested his young niece for about 6 years and stopped just a few months before going on a rape and murder rampage up and down the state of California. Now, we ended part 1 in the epically horrific murder of 9-year-old Mei Lung, who was raped, beaten, stabbed, and left hanging by her own shirt in the basement of a hotel-style apartment building in San Francisco, so in a poorer area called the Tenderloin, which is still kind of a poorer area, but pretty gentrified, as is most of San Francisco. Now, this is one of the more horrific crimes of his, which is crazy to say, as most of what he did is really awful. But the violence against a child is just, beyond the pale. I would say he was just as violent with other people, but they were adults. And I mean, I guess, a million's a million. It's all fucking terrible. But the fact that his first murder was a little girl is really telling about the kind of person that he is, Now, before I get more into this absolute piece of shit, I wanted to share that I found out that a friend of mine, who's a bit older than I am, I will say, actually grew up knowing the Ramirez family, and his older sister used to hang out with Richard Ramirez at the local park. My friend was born and raised in El Paso and was the youngest of 3 by about 10 years. So while Richard was 13 years older than he is, his sister was only 3 years younger than Richard. And you know how it goes with neighborhood kids, ages can range quite a bit, but you kind of all hang out. My friend also said he remembers hanging out with a younger boy he thought was maybe Richard's younger brother, but it wasn't. It was Rosie's little brother, and Rosie is the niece that he was raping. And he's actually the younger sibling of hers, was about the same age as my friend. So anyway, that's fucking crazy. He pointed out, he said the family was a bunch of weirdos, but he named the cross street where they lived, and I looked it up. The house is no longer there, but you can still find the address, and he was like exactly right. And apparently his dad worked next door to their house, which is crazy. The whole area is a park now, which is like also weird, but like what a fucking trip, right? So anyway, the world is very small. You know, I have friends that wrote a song about Richard Ramirez, and I have a friend who fucking knew Richard Ramirez and his whole fucking family. That shit is fucking wild to me. But anyway, okay, let's get into the insanity of this case. When we left off, as I said, Richard was in and out of living with his brother and sleeping in stolen cars in LA, or staying with his friend Donna in the Bay Area, and had just killed Mei Lung in the Bay Area. And real quick, prior to that, he'd actually abducted another little girl from her home in LA, forcing her into a duffel bag and repeatedly sexually assaulting her before dropping her off in a random place in the dark, all alone to fend for herself. But he did not kill her. She was returned to her parents and described her attacker as tall, dark, and with terrible breath. Luckily, she survived, as did a few other children he abducted and raped, including a boy who he took from his home, assaulted, and dropped off randomly, like he had with the first girl. He also picked a little girl up from a bus stop and returned her to another random place when he was done. So this was kind of like his like precursor, I guess, was just like picking the kids up, you know, assaulting them, molesting them, and then dropping them off somewhere else. Unfortunately, Mei Lung did not survive, but all the other children did, which is a small favor in a case like this. So real quick, I do have to correct myself. I'm off by a whole ass fucking year. So he didn't kill Mei Lung in 1985. He killed her in 1984. So this was April 10th, 1984. And I apologize, I'm a whole year off because I believe he stopped molesting his niece in 1983 and then killed Mei Lung a few months later in 1984. So I do apologize. Part one, I was off by a year. I'm not actually sure how that happened, but I did want to call that out. So again, Mei Lung was murdered April 10th, 1984, and not even 3 months later, on June 27th, 1984, Richard again went on the prowl. Now, this time he was in LA in the Glassell Park area, which is weird as I just drove through there like a couple of weeks ago when I took these notes. I actually said earlier today, but obviously it's taken me a while to record. I used to go through there all the time. I used to work in Eagle Rock, which is literally next door, and they're kind of interchangeable. So I know this area well. So when I read that this is where like kind of his first LA murder took place, it really kind of freaked me out. So this is like a very working class area. It's very gentrified now, but even, 5-10 years ago when I was working there, it was still very like working class, and many areas are. But it's also mostly families, mostly homes, and is generally like a quiet, safe area to live. Now on this night, obviously Richard's going to fuck all that up, because as always, he was high on cocaine, which he just shot into his veins. He wasn't even snorting it at this point. He was literally shooting it. And from here, he wanted to get into some trouble. Now, real quick, as you'll see, Richard Ramirez is fairly different from other serial killers in that he's not organized in any way. Not in who he murders, not really in how he murders, although that does start to become a little more of a pattern. But one of the only things that is pretty consistent with his crimes is that he would always steal something from his victims' homes, which harkens back to his nickname of Fingers on account of being a borderline kleptomaniac. Now, beyond that, his attacks were extremely random in pretty much every way imaginable. Now, I do want to say that as time goes on, you do start to see some repeated behaviors. And I think had this lasted a lot longer, he would have developed a signature and sort of like a calling card. But as you'll see, this was like, a year and a half spree, and it never became really organized. I think he's considered a thrill killer with, the random nature of his attacks being what turns him on, like what he likes about it most, which is really fucking gross. Anyway, it's June 27th, late at night, and Richard goes to a 2-story pink apartment building off of Chapman Street. Now, he makes sure nobody's around. And remember, he's been taught really well how to prowl and how to peep and how to break in homes. So he knows when he's safe to break in. And this is also how he makes his money. So he's quite adept at this. So he chooses a floor-level apartment in this building. He has no idea who lives there or even if anybody's home. And he just breaks in. He just decides to see what's going to happen. And inside is 79-year-old Jenny Vincow. Now, she lives alone, but one of her 2 sons lives just upstairs in the apartment, just up and over from hers, which is what makes this so much more heartbreaking, just to know he was so close while all of this happened. Richard entered the house through an open window and quickly came upon Jenny sleeping soundly in her bed. He quickly realized she was alone and decided to steal some valuables from the house. When he found there were none, he became very angry. And whether he intended to or not originally, at that moment, he decided he was going to kill Jenny because he was pissed off that she didn't have anything for him to take. He took a 6-inch hunting knife from his backpack, which is honestly really strange. He doesn't normally bring knives with him, but this time he did. He stood over her for a moment and then plunged the knife into her chest. Jenny woke up screaming, but somehow nobody heard her. He stabbed her over and over, covering her mouth to muffle her screams, and he then slashed her throat so deeply that she was nearly decapitated. He then watched as she died. And this is really rough, guys. This excited him. So he then either raped her dead body or pleasured himself over it for over an hour before washing his hands in her bathroom sink, grabbing a small radio, as he always had to steal something, and leaving her apartment. He got into the stolen car he'd driven to the area and went back to Skid Row in downtown LA. Now, around 1 p.m. the following day, Jenny's son Jack came down from his apartment to check on his mom. And you can guess what he saw. It's so fucked up. Police were called and they were able to find 2 or 3 partial fingerprints, but not much else. And those were unfortunately not super helpful. As police began their investigation, because remember, this is the first LA murder and it's not connected to any of the child abductions. So they have nothing to go on. So they're just getting started on this investigation while Richard begins to, continue his crime spree. Now, for a while, he didn't kill anybody else, but he regularly broke into and burglarized many homes, sometimes 3 or 4 in a day, to support his drug habit, as well as pay for rooms when he was fighting with his brother, which was pretty often. He also, like I said, I think this is actually kind of when I hit my mic, sorry. This is when he started abducting the children. So he was doing this kind of at the beginning, in between. So he stopped molesting his niece or raping his niece. He killed Mei Lung in San Francisco. Then he killed Jenny. And then he was throughout this time, both before and after May, I believe he was abducting these children. Now, I personally believe that the children, he was doing that to make up for what he could no longer do to his niece. But once he started realizing that he could just murder adults, he stopped because he was getting even more power and excitement from that than he was from hurting kids. So he sort of escalated out of molesting children because it was more about power and switched to just attacking adults. Now, I could be wrong, but that's my assessment. Now, 9 months after he killed Jenny Vincow, and only about a month after abducting his final little girl, on March 17th, 1985, Richard Ramirez followed a woman to her condo in Rosemead, which is sort of in the southern part of LA, more on the east side of the city, kind of near Pasadena, which is where a lot of his attacks took place. So I don't actually think he attacked anybody in Pasadena, but it's all kind of just south of there, but over on that side of the city. The woman he followed home was Marie Hernandez, who lived with Dale Yoshi Okazaki. As a note, both were women. Dale, who was 34, had come home from her parents' house just after 9 p.m. and was inside the home. Dale was a really lovely woman. She was bright, she was fun, she was loving, she was a super good and supportive friend. One friend later recalled that he had told her he had to paint his house that weekend, and bright and early Saturday morning, she showed up paintbrush in hand. It was one of the final, wonderful acts of kindness that Dale did in her life, unfortunately. Dale was creative and fun. She was taking classes on computer programming, cake decorating, and flower arranging. She had also recently completed a class on self-defense. Now, Dale had saved up her money to buy this condo for a long time and had Maria move in to help with the mortgage. They were obviously also friends. Now, that night, Maria was on her way home and was just getting out of her car when she is approached by Richard Ramirez, who came at her with his .22 caliber gun drawn. She yelled, "Oh God, no, please don't." But he shot her anyway, aiming right at her face. Luckily, Maria, her name's Maria, not Marie, sorry. Maria had her keys in her hand and held them to her face, and they fucking blocked the bullet. She somehow had the presence of mind to play dead, but unfortunately, the attack had taken place inside of their open garage, which was attached to the house by a door that went into their kitchen. Dale, who again was inside, heard the shot and was in the kitchen walking toward that very door when Richard Ramirez used it to come into their house. Dale quickly dove behind a counter, but Richard stood stock still and waited. Dale, thinking he might be gone, lifted her head over the counter to see if the coast was clear, and Richard shot her in the face at nearly point-blank range. Dale died immediately. Meanwhile, Maria gets up to run for help, and Richard actually saw her. She screamed for him to please not shoot her again and hid behind a car. And instead of pursuing her, Richard left in yet another stolen car, leaving his first living witness. Maria then called the police, but unfortunately it was too late to save Dale. As a side note, when Dale's funeral took place, so many people came that they had to put seating outside of the church. That's the kind of woman that she was. And Richard Ramirez fucking murdered her in her home for no fucking reason. Now, just about 30 minutes after this attack, Richard got on the 10 freeway and went just a short ways to Monterey Park, which again, just a little bit south of Pasadena. And as a note, is one of the safest cities in that area. They have great schools, very family-oriented. They have a very large Asian population. It's a very, very safe, very family-oriented area. He followed another woman off of the freeway, and which is so weird. He just I don't know, in the dark at night, I don't notice who I'm driving in front of or behind, but I guess I'm not hunting people either. So anyway, he follows this woman off the freeway. The woman was 30-year-old Veronica Yu, who was on her way to the home she shared with her parents after spending the day with her friend. Veronica actually realized that Richard Ramirez was following her and pulled over and stopped. That's fucking bold. He drove by, deciding to leave her alone, but then she started following him, which this is not me victim blaming, but guys, don't fucking do this. And I do it too. I gotta listen to my own advice. It's just, I'm not blaming her. I would probably do the fucking same thing if some dude was following me. But it's not smart. Now, Richard realized he was now being followed by her, and he pulled over. She pulled her car up next to him, and he got out of his car. She demanded to know why he was following her, and at first he denied it. Then he said, "Oh, I thought I knew you." When she said, "You're a fucking liar," basically, and threatened to call the police, Richard lost control, jumping over from the passenger side of her car to the driver's side, from the driver's side of the car to the passenger side, and getting in the passenger seat before shooting her in the ribs at point blank range. He then shot her again as she fell out of the car while screaming for help. Richard took off in her car, not realizing there were two separate witnesses to this attack. He was so frenzied in this moment, he forgot to be careful. One man called the police while the other tried to help Veronica and also asked her who the man was. She was unable to speak, but she was still alive. Sadly, she died just before making it to the hospital. Police immediately interviewed Maria as well as the witnesses to Veronica's murder, and both gave a very similar description of the killer. In fact, both Maria and one of the other witnesses worked with two artists to create composite sketches of the killer, and they were really, really similar. It looked like two versions of the same person, which they were, but it's interesting that they were that close because that doesn't always happen, to be sure. Now, again, at this point, you have to remember that, the police don't know about Richard Ramirez. They don't have any sort of, spree killer or serial killer on their radar. And the way that Maria described the attack made the police wonder if the killer was ex-military. The headshot aim, the quick, emotionless attack, it's all very strange. They believed Maria when she said that she didn't know her attacker, which meant it was random, and they believed it to be the same for Veronica. As a note, and this does come up later, despite the police not really having anything to go on at this point, Richard accidentally left his AC/DC hat at the scene. Apparently it fell off and he ran away without it, which was another clue he left behind. So he left behind somebody who could identify him physically, and he left behind an AC/DC hat, which later becomes a big part of things, anybody who knows the case. Now, at this point, they brought in rock star detective Frank Salerno, who solved the Hillside Strangler case, which we will cover, for help to see if he could figure out what the hell was going on. I won't get too far into the specifics of that, but I did want to mention his involvement, as he's a well-known and very respected detective, a hero in the true crime world, if you will, and I will be mentioning him a little bit throughout, so I just want to call it now. He and another detective, Gil Carrillo, began working this case and actually picked up a suspect, a man named Paul Samuels. He was put in a lineup, was not identified, and was released. From here, things got really bad. Just over a week after these murders, Richard went out again looking for victims. And this time, his victims were not super random. About a year prior, he had burglarized a house in Whittier, up in the hills where wealthy people live, up above the main city, which was nice but more working class. He remembered the house was nice, so he thought he'd go back, and this time he'd do a lot more than just steal from his occupants. Which is so fucked up. Like, you already fucking burglarized their house. Like, leave them alone. He did not. At 2 a.m. on March 28th, 1985, Richard broke into the home of Vincent and Maxine Zazzara. Vincent was asleep on the couch with Maxine in the bedroom. Richard broke in through a window, which he pried open. So even people who didn't leave their windows open or unlocked were not safe. He attacked Vincent first, shooting him in the head while he slept. Vincent actually jumped up and tried to grab the gun, but the bullet wasn't done doing damage and quickly hit his carotid artery, causing him to collapse. Maxine, hearing the commotion, tried to get up out of bed, but Richard was on her too quickly. He tied her hands with a necktie he found in the room and began ransacking the house. Maxine, however, was a tough woman and was able to untie her hands and grabbed a shotgun from under their bed. As Richard spun around, she pointed it at him and she pulled the trigger. Unfortunately, the gun was empty. Vincent had just recently removed the bullets because their grandchildren had come over and he wanted to be safe, which, way to fucking be, what a good grandpa, but fuck this fucking timing. Because very, very, very unfortunately, he had not put the bullets back in. And I think if he had, the story would have a very different ending. Instead, Richard became absolutely enraged and shot Maxine 3 times, killing her nearly instantly. From there, he went to their kitchen, grabbed a large knife, and began mutilating her body. First, by trying to cut her heart out, and when that didn't work, by cutting out her eyes, placing them in a nearby jewelry box, which is fucking morbid as fuck. As a note, he took that box with him when he left, but before that, he tried to rape her, but was so shaken by his own near-death experience, he wasn't able to. So instead, he stole a VCR and some jewelry, got back in his stolen car, and went back to Skid Row. The next evening, Vincent and Maxine were found by one of their employees who had come by to drop off some money to them, as he did at the end of every shift. He actually went by twice, the second time bringing another employee with him as he had a bad feeling. The first time he went by, the front door was slightly ajar and nobody answered when he called out to them, despite both cars being in the driveway. His second visit took him inside the house, and what he found absolutely destroyed him. He and the other employee called the police, and soon the area was a zoo with neighbors, detectives, the whole bit. Now, at this scene, police found more evidence that would later tie Richard to the crimes, and this evidence is a part of his lore. Not as famous as his terrible breath, but still one of those things that anybody who really knows this case knows. That evidence was an 11 and a half size Avia, I don't know, sneaker shoe print, which was found outside the Zazzara home by the window where he broke in. At first, police didn't connect these murders with the others Richard had committed, but pretty quickly, Gil Carrillo and Frank Salerno did, and they added this evidence to the fingerprints on the car and the AC/DC had, and realized that they had a serial killer on the loose, and he had struck again and again got away. As a reminder, still to this day, but especially back then, police departments for each city were run by that city and didn't really want to share evidence or information, either because they didn't know to or because of pride and bravado and all that bullshit. Salerno and Carrillo knew that some of the attacks had taken place in Monterey Park, so they went to those police to try to better connect the dots, and they were not disappointed. They found that the police had the car used in the attempted abduction and eventual murder of Veronica Yu. They also found that LAPD had a shoe print from one of the attempted abductions of one of the children, one who actually got away from him and wasn't assaulted. The shoe print was basically a cast. He had stepped in wet cement, and it was in fact an 11 and a half size Avia shoe. Also, 2 of the 3 surviving children had noted, victims just in general, had noted that their abductor's breath was horrible and that a foul stench seemed to emanate from him, which I fucking love that for you, Richard, you fucking piece of shit. Using this information and just kind of knowing what was about to happen because they're detectives and they're good detectives, a task force was formed, but still they didn't have much, and Richard Ramirez remained free to kill again. At this time, Richard was staying at the Cecil Hotel, which, to sort of take everyone out of the story, I want to mention, if I haven't yet, that I used to live literally next door to this building in 2009 and 2010. When I lived there, they had changed the name a few times and had done some really weird shit to try to get people to stay there, including offering a free room to anybody willing to sleep in this, glass front room on Main Street so people could fucking see them in their rooms at pretty much any time. It was a really weird gimmick, but it kind of worked. And before COVID came and brought downtown back to kind of where it was when Richard was staying down there, the place almost became sort of a cool place to stay. Of course, we'll talk about Elisa Lam at some point, which I'll eventually cover. But for those who don't know, she died under very mysterious circumstances in the Cecil Hotel in 2013. Anyway, this hotel could be a podcast in itself. It's so full of true crime history. And of course, Richard Ramirez was a part of that. So he was staying there at the time and would regularly pick up sex workers using money stolen from his victims. He was also using drugs, not just daily, but almost every waking hour. He had, kind of decided to give in to his demons entirely and to embrace his version of Satanism fully and to do evil in the hopes of getting all his wishes fulfilled by the devil himself. His favorite book was Truman Capote's In Cold Blood. His favorite movies were Nightmare on Elm Street and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And of course, he loved AC/DC, which to me is the mildest of all of those things. Most importantly, he continued his frenzy, taking less than 3 weeks off before attacking his next victims. On April 14th, 1985, despite knowing police were looking for him in the area, he returned to Monterey Park and found the home of 66-year-old Bill Doy and his bed-bound wife, 56-year-old Lillian Doy. Lillian had suffered a stroke 2 years prior and still had trouble speaking, but the two still lived a good life with Bill as her caretaker and had in fact just bought a van so they could tour the country together, seeing the sights and enjoying their golden years. Unfortunately, this was not to be. Richard broke into the house through an open window and found himself in a back room in the dead of night. He then made his way to the bedroom where Bill was sleeping, as Lillian had a hospital bed, so they slept in separate rooms. Bill heard him enter the room and immediately went for his own gun in the nightstand. Unfortunately, Richard shot him just above the lip, and the bullet damaged his throat, voice box, and brain, forcing Bill to the ground and unable to lift his arm to fire his own gun. So this is another close call for Richard. But again, he gets away. Richard then beat Bill unconscious as he begged for his life. He then took his gun and went to find Lillian. He said something to her he said to a lot of his victims, another calling card in an otherwise very disorganized killer. And what he said was, "Shut up, bitch, or I'll kill you." Richard ransacked the house, then put thumb cuffs on Lillian and raped her repeatedly. He then left, leaving her alive, likely thinking that since she couldn't speak, she wouldn't be a threat. Bill somehow woke up, got up, and crawled to the phone, calling 911 and begging for help. All he could say over and over was, "Help me, help me, help me." Police came as quickly as they could, and in the meantime, Lillian was somehow able to remove one of the thumb cuffs, though it left her thumb raw and bleeding. When police arrived at 5:04 a.m., they found Lillian standing in the doorway of her room, unable to speak, but pointing to Bill, who had managed to get himself into a chair before losing consciousness. He was alive, but barely. They rushed to do CPR, then took Bill to the hospital, where very sadly, he was pronounced dead at 5:29 a.m. Lillian survived the attack and spoke of a man wearing all black, wrote of a man wearing all black with foul breath who shot her husband. Monterey Park Police this time stonewalled the LAPD detectives and didn't tell them about the Avia shoe print or much of anything else, including what kind of gun was used. This type of shit pisses me off so fucking much. Like, you're gonna let more people die because of your fucking ego? Like, fuck you. The egos of shitty men allowing more people to be killed when their literal job is to keep that type of thing from happening is just fucking crazy to me. So anyway, Gil and Frank still think this is connected, but they don't have the proof because Monterey Park sucks. Monterey Park Police. The city's great. Anyway, on May 29th, 1985, just a few weeks later, Richard again went out prowling, this time stealing a Mercedes from a restaurant before ending up in Monrovia, which again, not super far from Monterey Park. This general area, like I said, is his favorite hunting ground, so most of the murders are going to be in this general area. I think it's probably because it was like a rich area and people left their doors and windows open or unlocked quite often just because it felt so safe. And that was exactly the case on this night when Richard randomly chose the home of 83-year-old Mabel Ma Bell, who lived with her 81-year-old disabled sister, Nettie. Ma left her front door unlocked, a habit she brought with her when she moved to the area from Oklahoma over 35 years prior. Richard, like I said, chose this area for its wealth, so when he entered the unlocked home and found it very modest inside, he became quite angry. He felt like he was wasting his time. He was even angrier when he realized there were no young women there, only two very elderly women, one of whom was clearly an invalid. Richard searched the house for a weapon and came upon a hammer, which he took into Nettie's room. Because again, he's a disorganized killer. He doesn't bring his own stuff. So he goes into Nettie's room with her own hammer and hits her over the head several times, jamming the sharp end into her brain. He then used her bedside clock to tie her hands, which feels very unnecessary at this point, but it's a good thing he did because he accidentally stepped on the clock and left a bloody footprint. Size 11.5, Avia. He then went into Ma Bell's room and hit her over the head, but unlike Nettie, she woke up screaming. He demanded money, and she said she didn't have any, so he hit her again, then bound her with duct tape. He then took the cord from her alarm clock and used it to shock her as she was still alive. This torture turned him on because he's disgusting, so he went back to Nettie's room and raped her while she was still unconscious. He then took Ma Bell's lipstick and drew a pentagram on the back of her thigh, then on the wall above her bed, so people would know that he walked with Satan. He then had a fucking snack from their kitchen, stole what he could find, and left. The two women were still alive. The very next day, this piece of shit made his way to Burbank, where I live and where my son currently goes to school. He made his way to Avon Street, which is like one of those streets that goes all the way through town, but one part of it dead ends, and this is where this house was. It was like half a block from the dead end. Now, Burbank is an extremely safe, quiet town, even now. It has its rough edges, but for the most part, it's a lot of suburban homes, nice parks, good schools. Warner Brothers and Disney Studios are here. It's just like a very upscale community. So someone like Richard Ramirez coming to town is a big fucking deal. And it's another part of why he's so scary. He didn't care. He would just go anywhere. And on the night of May 30th, 1985, so again, 24 hours after attacking Ma Bell and Nettie, he parked his car at the end of this dead-end street and found the home of 42-year-old Carol Kyle, who lived with her 11-year-old son. All doors and windows were locked, but there was a doggy door in the back, and he used that to reach in and unlock the back door, then made his way into the house. There he found Carol sleeping in bed and ambushed her, holding the gun to her head and saying, "Shut up, bitch, or I'll kill you." So this was something he said so often that police actually used it in a lineup and made everybody say it so that they could better identify him later on when he gets caught. He makes Carol get out of bed and go to her son's room. He opens the door and goes to attack the son, but Carol throws herself between them, begging him not to hurt the boy. Instead, he tied the two of them together, then ransacked the house. He then unties Carol and takes her around the house to find her jewelry, and she accidentally lets it slip that she has a daughter who is staying over at a friend's house. He laughs and says, "Maybe I'll wait for her," which is fucking terrifying. Carol was a widowed nurse and knew she had to keep her cool or she and her son would die. She calmly did whatever Richard told her to do, and he ended up raping her, then tying her and her son up, ransacking the house a bit more, stealing more jewelry, taking her again, raping her again. And then finally, when she asked him, "Please don't let my son see me like this," because she was naked, he threw her like a robe and then asked her if he was in Glendale and then asked her for directions to the freeway, which is fucking crazy. So no deaths in this one, which is very strange, but also, he did leave some survivors here and there. And I think he just was like sexually frustrated. And I also think that she handled the situation in a way that disarmed him. So he didn't kill her. Now, meanwhile, the police just a few days later are just finding Ma Bell and Nettie. And this is shocking. Both women were still alive when they were found 3 days after the attack. Had they been found sooner, their chances of survival would have probably been a lot better. But just thinking about these women tied up, brains exposed, hands tied so tightly they were turning black, it's fucking terrifying. It's insane that they were alive at all. So it's good luck that the women were unconscious when they were found. One thing, Nettie did rear up in fear when the police tried to move her body, but it's believed that that was sort of like involuntary. Both were taken to the hospital where Ma, who died first, hung on for nearly 2 months, finally succumbing to her injuries on July 17th, 1985. I'm not sure when Nettie died, but I do know that she never left that hospital bed. Richard Ramirez fucking sucks. Now, just about a week later in early June, again, we're going back to like when these attacks took place, not when the women died, Ramirez again went out hunting, but this time he made a mistake, though unfortunately not a fatal one. He went back to the Pico Rivera area, which is not far from many of his other attacks, and in fact is just a block or so from the Zazzara murders. He found a house shrouded in darkness, hidden among trees, and began prying open a window. A woman who was asleep on the couch in the living room heard the window and called out for her husband, asking, "Why are you opening the window?" The husband came out of their bedroom and said he wasn't, and then went looking around outside. This man was Officer John Rodriguez, an LA sheriff's deputy. Outside their house, police found an 11.5 shoe size Avia, confirming this was their man, and he had almost attacked a sheriff and his wife. After this, Richard was quiet for a few weeks, despite not actually having killed anyone during his last outing. Now, I don't know if he was quiet because he almost got caught or if he figured out it was a cop. I really don't know. However, whatever the case, on June 28th, 1985, he went out again on the prowl and found himself again back in Arcadia. He found his way into the home of 28-year-old Patty Higgins, who lived alone and was a nice, easygoing woman. He broke in through either an open door or window, it's not really clear, and raped and sodomized Patty before beating her and nearly cutting her head off with a knife he found at her own home. This was a very, very brutal scene, and what's shocking is that nobody heard a thing while it was taking place. While he had taken a little time before this attack, he did not wait so long again, and on July 2nd, he returned again to Arcadia. He ended up near the freeway in yet another stolen car and stopped at the home of 75-year-old widow Mary Louise Cannon. Mary lived alone and had lived in the area her entire life. Richard found an open window and crawled in, made his way to Mary's bedroom, and smashed her over the head with a milk glass lamp. Mary woke up for only a moment, screaming, but was quickly knocked out by Richard pounding on her head with his fists. He then continued to beat her unconscious body, then went into her kitchen, found a knife, and nearly cut her head off. He did not assault Mary sexually, nor did he use her bathroom or eat her food as he had done in so many of his other attacks. For some reason, this didn't interest him. Maybe it was her age. Maybe it was because he had just had such a sexually violent attack a few days ago, a few days before this. I don't really know. Maybe it's because he didn't have to break in because she left her doors unlocked, because people who grew up in these areas tended to do that. I don't know. But regardless, he just left quickly and quietly. Now, pretty quickly, police began to realize that while Ramirez wasn't any sort of organized killer, he did have some similarities between murders, not just the shoe. For instance, they immediately knew these two murders were tied together by the knife wounds and beatings, as they were nearly identical for both women. And while there was no shoe print at Patty's home, there was a 1-inch portion of a print at Mary's. So, like, his shoe just left a tiny little print, but it showed that it was an Avia shoe, which then tied these two attacks to the many others before them. Now, of course, the police were on the TV and radio giving updates on this new serial killer and making it known they were on the hunt for him, showing his composite sketch on TV. But this didn't slow Richard Ramirez down one bit. Also, it didn't look enough like him, I think, to scare him. So instead, it emboldened him to keep going, thinking that Satan would be proud of him and that he'd be more famous than Jack the Ripper, which he's not, but nice try, bro. I want to call out that at this time, his shoe print was not released to the public, as police wanted to keep that information private so that he wouldn't change that. They didn't want him to change anything about his behavior because they wanted to track him, tie him to the murders, and catch him. I do want to say at this point in the story, he doesn't have that information, but later on, the then San Francisco mayor, Dianne Feinstein, did in fact release this information after he was tied to a murder in her city. And this obviously infuriated police because it gave him this information. And Richard Ramirez, in fact, did dump his shoes over the Golden Gate Bridge the same day that he saw the press release. However, at this point in our story, he doesn't know about the shoes. And actually, by the time she does this, it's pretty much near the end of his reign of terror anyway. So it really doesn't help him too much. But had he not been caught when he was, that would have changed a very important part of the evidence. So yeah, she's an idiot. I don't like her anyway. Now, 3 nights after the murder of Mary Louise Cannon, Richard drove to the city of Sierra Madre, which is a very quiet town. Again, kind of near Pasadena, just out past it. And there he found the Bennett home. To clarify, this was the night of the 4th of July, but it was past midnight when this attack occurred. So it was technically July 5th. But essentially, it's the night of 4th of July, which was just a few days ago because I'm super late getting this out to you guys, and I apologize. Anyway, this area is super safe. But like everybody knows about the serial killer on the loose, so the family was sure to lock the back door after their friends left for the night, but they accidentally left their front door unlocked as they rarely used it. Also, their daughter, 16-year-old Whitney Bennett, still hadn't come home from her own 4th of July party, and when she did come home, she also did not lock the front door, and instead just went straight into her bedroom to go to bed, and this was just off the main entrance to the house. Richard Ramirez just walked right into the unlocked house about an hour or so after Whitney came home and went first to her room and stole some jewelry from her dresser while she slept. He then went to her parents' room and decided that instead of using his gun, he would beat everyone to death with a tire iron, which he grabbed from his stolen car. So once again, just a crime of opportunity, not of opportunity, but just disorganized. Oh, I have a tire iron in my car. I'll just use that, right? So he came back in and decided to kill Whitney first. He was going to stab her with a knife, but he couldn't find a good one in the house, which again, part of being such a disorganized killer. So then he's like, okay, when I'm done like beating her, I'm going to strangle her to death and then I'll rape her dead body, right? This is like his fucked up plan of attack. However, as he was strangling Whitney with a telephone cord after beating her with the tire iron, he began hallucinating and saw first a spark fly from the telephone cord, then a blue haze leave her body. He let go of the cord and she took a deep breath, and this, along with the hallucination, scared him away, and he ran from the house thinking that Jesus or God was, helping her or something. I don't know. Fucking crazy. Later that morning, just a few hours later, around 6 a.m., Whitney woke up, having no recollection of the attack. She had a horrible headache and was covered in blood and had no idea why. Police were called and they found an Avia shoe print, which tied Richard to this attack as well. Though at this time, obviously, they didn't know his name. On July 7th, he returned to the area where Bill and Lillian Doy lived, this time entering a large home occupied by a 61-year-old divorcee named Joyce Nelson. So he did this attack against Whitney on July 5th, got freaked out, scared off, ran away, but it really didn't deter him in the end because here he is already coming back. So Joyce was strong-willed and tough, but not a large woman and didn't have any guns in her home, so she was definitely vulnerable. Richard entered her home through an unlocked window and attacked Joyce, who resisted him so much he became infuriated. And instead of raping her or whatever he planned to do, he simply beat her to death right there in her living room, leaving a footprint on her face. It's fucking brutal. This man is truly fucking evil. That same night, because he hadn't been able to sexually assault Joyce, he was still on the prowl and at 3 a.m. on July 8th ended up in Monterey Park, where he entered the home of 63-year-old Sophie Dickman. She was a psychiatric nurse, and I believe her experience in this role is what helped her to survive this attack. He broke into her home, beat her, demanded her jewelry, and attempted to rape her, but could not get an erection. Finally, after handcuffing her to her bed, he left, saying that if she screamed, he'd come back and kill her. So he breaks into one woman's home with the intent of raping her, can't do it, beats her to death because he's so pissed at her resisting him, goes to this other home. The woman doesn't resist him, so he rapes her and then doesn't kill her. So it really does seem that the people who cooperate in a way, at least the women, don't necessarily end up dead, but sometimes they do. It's very random. It's very disorganized, which is fucking terrifying. Now, around this time, things got really crazy with the media, and this is what a lot of the people in my life remember. Nobody knew who this person was, obviously, at this point, but everybody was terrified. Like I said, my friend slept with a knife under his mattress, and citywide, gun sales, security dogs, locks, fences were all being bought at record speed by everyone living from LA all the way down to San Diego. It was a very scary time. And also, having Frank Salerno on the case made it even more scary for the public because everybody knew him from the Hillside Strangler case. Like, why bring in the big guns unless there's a very real threat? So around this time, it was chaos. And, as the public always wants to get involved, so police were getting endless calls, letters, all these tips, whatever. That being said, some of these leads were actually helpful, as a few people had seen Richard while he was out on the prowl, and many sketches and descriptions helped to create a very real idea of what he looked like, which people, of course, released on TV in case anybody knew who he was. Also, this actually got more police departments involved as well, which led to a pretty big break in the case. Like I said, as we all know, police departments do not like working together because they are run by a bunch of old-ass children with fragile fucking egos who would rather let people die than swallow their pride. But luckily, this time around, a cop who had accidentally pulled Richard over while he was in a stolen car, then let him get away on foot, had kept the car and paid attention to what was going on and called in Salerno and his partner Gil Carrillo to investigate. Inside, they found a dental office appointment card with a date and time on it. They also found 6 phone numbers in a little black book inside a wallet that was left in the car. So these are very big details. They're not sure if they belong to the person whose car was stolen, if they belong to the person who stole the car, but this is good stuff to follow up on. Call the phone numbers, figure out who they belong to, go visit the dentist, right? And as we all know, the dentist is definitely Richard's because he got fucked up teeth. Meanwhile, however, Richard did not stop nor even slow down his killing spree. On July 20th, he bought a machete from a downtown knife store, and that night drove to Glendale and found the home of Maxon and Leela Needing, a couple again in their late 60s. As the couple were sleeping in their bed, Richard broke into their home, burst into their bedroom, and hacked at them both with the machete. When that didn't kill them, which is fucking horrifying, he shot them with his gun while they pleaded for their lives, then ransacked their home and then left. As we now know, if he doesn't rape someone during an attack, he will likely attack again that same night, and this night was no different from the rest. He then drove to Sun Valley, which is like 2 miles from me, by the way, and broke into the Covenant house. Sorry if I said that wrong. He found 32-year-old Somkid Kovananth sleeping on the couch and said his famous line, "Shut up, bitch, or I'll kill you." Then went and found her 2 children who were sleeping, and then her husband, Chainarong. He shot Chainarong in the head while he was still asleep, killing him instantly. He then tied up Somkid, raped her repeatedly, tied up her 8-year-old son when he woke up, raped her some more, ransacked their home, and then left. Now, while he does this, the ransacking of the home, oftentimes he makes the woman go with him, and he beats her and slaps her while demanding things. And if they don't have enough jewelry, if they don't have enough money, he'll beat her more. Sometimes he ends up killing them as a result. As we've talked about, even his one of his very first murders was because he couldn't find anything good in the house and he was pissed. So he murdered the woman while she slept in her bed, So it's a very terrifying, very brutal, very violent attack all the way through. Fortunately, he did leave. He had only killed Chainarong. And when police arrived, they found Avia footprints at the scene. There were no prints at the Kneading murders, but it was still tied to Richard because of the backdoor break-in, the viciousness of the attack, and the ransacking of the home. Also, it happened in the same night, which is another one of the things that they notice. There will be 2 attacks in a row. So police are starting to kind of find these patterns even to a very disorganized killer, but they still haven't found anything to figure out who the fuck this is. And on August 6th, 1985, Richard attacked a couple in their Northridge home. Chris and Virginia Peterson were a young married couple with a 5-year-old daughter. They knew about the break-ins, but they felt they lived far enough away not to worry too much because Northridge is way up in the other direction. It's on the way out of LA, up the 5, towards Sacramento. They still locked their doors, of course, but they slept pretty soundly, they weren't really worried. And honestly, it doesn't make sense. This is such a random attack. But that night on August 6th, Richard snuck into their home and went directly into their room. He cocked his gun as he entered the bedroom, and this woke up Virginia, as she was a really light sleeper, and she immediately began demanding he tell her why he was there. Instead, he shot her just under her left eye at point-blank range. Chris was awake by now and heard Virginia say, "I think he shot me with a stun gun," which was crazy she was able to talk or move or, not be dead. He then shot Chris 3 times in the head, knocking him down. Now, this also didn't kill or even really stop Chris from fighting back, probably thinking about their young daughter who was now awake and crying. Richard shot them both again, or shot at them both again, missing repeatedly until his gun was empty. It was then that Chris pounced and the 2 began fighting. Now, Chris was obviously very injured, so Richard was able to throw him off, and he ran out the door because he's a fucking bitch. He thought about going back in to kill them both with a reloaded gun, but he assumed the police were already on their way, so he took off in yet another stolen Toyota. Both survived the attack. Both Chris and Martina survived the attack, which I love to be able to say, and it's thought that they survived because Richard's ammo was old and the gunpowder didn't work well. And hey, whatever it takes, man, I'm just glad. Richard continued his reign of terror on the night of August 8th, 1985, when he went all the way out to Diamond Bar, which again is pretty far from where he'd been hunting, but at least more on that side of the city, and terrorized the Abowath family. 31-year-old, I think it's Elvis Abowath, and his 27-year-old wife, Sakina, were very happily married with 2 small children, aged 3 and the other only 10 weeks old. Richard slipped in through their back sliding glass door, shot and killed Elvis in their shared bed, then tortured and raped Sakina repeatedly while beating her and demanding money and jewelry. He also did this while her dead husband's body was in the same bed. However, he lied to her and told her he hadn't killed her husband, which is one more layer of cruelty to her. After he raped her, tied up her 3-year-old, he then left them both in the room with her dead husband's body, ate food from their fridge, then left in a car he had brazenly parked in their fucking driveway. He was so confident nobody would notice. Police immediately knew this was their serial killer as he sodomized Sakina as he had done to most of his other survivors and had made her swear to Satan, which was also becoming part of his MO. At this time, the police offered what was then a huge reward for any information about Richard. And of course, This worked, as all of his scumbag buddies were ready to sell him out. One of these scumbag buddies, his quote-unquote friend, Jesse Perez, a total piece of shit hustler who lived on the streets. He had a friend he knew as Rick, who fit the killer's description a little too well. He decided to reach out to police, but Richard was smart and knew he was about to get caught, so he skipped town going up to the Bay Area to terrorize its residents. So Jesse is reaching out to the police. They've released sketches. They've explained, oh, he's a Satanist. He makes people swear to Satan. He does all these other things. And people are starting to realize who the fuck this is. And Richard's starting to realize that he's going to get caught. So he bails out. And meanwhile, Jesse is singing like a canary, right? So on August 18th, after assaulting a random woman in the Tenderloin district of San Francisco, because he goes up to the Bay Area to stay with his friends and terrorize those residents. So after assaulting her, just randomly, she's like on the street and he just like beats her to the ground. He entered the home of Peter and Barbara Pan, another couple of 60-somethings who had come from Taiwan and made a wonderful life for themselves. He did his normal bullshit, shot Peter while he slept, killing him instantly, then sexually assaulted Barbara. This time, however, Barbara did not comply. She fought back fiercely, which, as always, upset Richard. So he also shot her in the head, then ransacked the house and wrote Jack the Knife on the wall, along with a pentagram in her lipstick. Jack the Knife is a song. You can look it up. It's really fucking gnarly. The Pan's son found them the next day, and luckily, Barbara survived her injuries. Very sadly, Peter did not. And very quickly, the attack was linked to all the others, both by shoe prints and also ballistic evidence. It was after this murder that Diane Feinstein, who, like I said, is an idiot in general, gave away all of the police evidence, which, again, was infuriating to detectives. Again, this tipped off Richard, who changed his shoes and got rid of the gun and ammo so it would be harder to track him. Thanks, Diane. Richard then returned to LA since police knew he was in the Bay Area, so he figured he'd get out of Dodge. On August 24th, so this is all happening very quickly, and as a note, San Francisco is about 5 hours from LA if you drive like I do anyway, so it's really easy to go back and forth. So anyway, it's August 24th. He was just up there murdering people, and Richard realizes he needs to stay out of the LA area for a bit. So instead, he goes down to Orange County, down to Mission Viejo. At first, he came upon the Romero residents and planned to attack them. However, 13-year-old James Romero III was awake and went into the family garage to find a pillow, as they had just come home from vacation and some of their things were still in their car. While in the garage, he saw Richard Ramirez attempting to break into his house, which is fucking terrifying. He woke up his parents, who quickly called the police, and he also got a good look not only at Richard, but at his stolen car, including the license plate. Richard fled, but was undeterred and continued to search for victims in the area. Now, Mission Viejo now, I think, is like a lot nicer, but at the time, it was very working class. It was good families. It was like very like chill, but it was definitely a more working class area. So he comes upon the home of Bill Carnes and his fiancée, Inez Erickson, and he snuck inside. He did his normal routine, first shooting Bill in the head, then attacking Inez, raping her, sodomizing her, making her swear on Satan, and beating her while ransacking the home. He then left and drove the stolen car back to LA before abandoning it. Before he did, he wiped it for prints. Now, normally he was really careful and kept gloves on while driving and while attacking people, but it was so hot out this night that he took them out to drive. Or took them off. Because his hands were sweating, I guess. I don't know, gross. He wiped down the car, then just kind of left it somewhere. Meanwhile, police are already at both homes in Mission Viejo, collecting evidence from both scenes and speaking with the young James, who gave them all the information he had, including the description and license plate of the Toyota Richard had been driving. Richard continued to scumbag around LA, but didn't make any further attacks for the next few days, and while he was laying low, police were working hard. First, they were speaking with his friend Jesse, who told them Rick, as he knew him, was was obsessed with Satan, bragged about killing people, made his living as a burglar, and liked to hang around the Greyhound station in downtown LA. He also said that he loved heavy metal, which is important. Up in San Francisco, police released photos of the jewelry taken from the Pan murder, and Richard's friend Donna, who I mentioned back, I think, in the first episode, immediately recognized some of the jewelry as items Richard had gifted to her the last time he was in town, which of course was also when this murder/robbery took place. Donna's son Earl called into police and told them all about Rick, but unfortunately didn't know his last name. He also mentioned his love of heavy metal, which tracked with the AC/DC hat left at the scene of Dale's murder. Now remember, Dale's murder was one of his very first ones, and he accidentally left the AC/DC hat. So now they've got even more stuff connecting all of these crimes, but also connecting this guy Rick to these crimes. They've got people in San Francisco and LA giving the same evidence about this guy, same murder, same information. Donna was interviewed and told police to talk to another guy named Armando because she said she didn't know Rick's last name, which is really interesting because they met him in El Paso and he's like living with them and staying at their house, but they don't know his last name. I feel like they just didn't want to talk. But she says, go talk to this guy named Armando. Armando was another scumbag. He was like a fence. He'd sell stuff for Richard or whatever. But after a little bit of pressing by police, essentially them like threatening to fucking arrest him, Armando gave up Richard's last name and police finally knew who they were looking for. Richard Ramirez from El Paso, Texas, in his mid-20s, obsessed with Satan, loved heavy metal, and had stolen items from a murder scene. Now, they had the name Richard Ramirez, but there were quite a few Richard Ramirez's out there. It's not the most uncommon name around, so they were still trying to figure out which Richard they needed to arrest. Luckily, police were able to find that stolen Toyota James Romero III had told them about. It had been abandoned in Koreatown and found one single fingerprint that Richard had failed to wipe away. They then sent that fingerprint to Sacramento's crime lab, who were able to use a sort of pre-CODIS to match that print to the correct Richard Ramirez. They showed the mugshot to Jesse, who confirmed that was the man he was talking about, and that was that. Now, they just had to find him. Richard, though he knew police were closing in, honestly had no idea his photo was being circulated all over the news, on the streets, in newspapers, basically everywhere. He decided now was a good time to take a trip out of town, and he went to the bus station and got on a bus to Tucson to visit his older brother. While sitting in the station waiting for his brother to answer his phone, the station in Tucson, he noticed a bunch of plainclothes cops walking around. He noticed they were all looking for buses coming in from LA, which meant he had beat them to Tucson somehow. They all knew this Richard Ramirez had a brother. They figured he might go see him, and man, they were right. Unfortunately, they didn't catch him at the station. He got back on a bus going to LA and barely escaped the police. Likewise, police weren't looking for buses coming into LA, only going out. So once he got back to LA, he was able to get off the bus and go into the city without the cops noticing. That being said, people were starting to recognize him on the street, and that scared him. 2 women called him El Matador as he passed them, which meant the murderer. And a newsstand owner in downtown saw Richard pick up a paper with his own face on it and called police immediately. Richard fled, running to a bus and riding it away from downtown towards East LA. People on the bus also recognized him, so he jumped out of the bus and began running on foot, jumping fences and running through people's yards. He ended up on Hubbard Street in East LA, a street full of hardworking blue-collar families, mostly Mexican at the time, and still that way today. He was being followed already by people from the neighborhood and continued to try to run. He ended up in the front yard of Faustino Piñon, who was working on his daughter's Mustang. It was up on blocks in the yard, but running. Richard saw the car and didn't see anyone around, so hopped in and tried to put it in gear. Faustino had been coming out of his house at just that moment with another tool to work on the car and saw Richard. Faustino stopped Richard from taking his car, but he quickly escaped the man's yard and found Angela de la Torre getting into her car just up the street. He demanded she give him her keys, and she said no, which I fucking love. Like, she's not fucking around. He then punched her in the stomach, because of course he did, and grabbed the keys. Her friend Lourdes was actually already in her car and went running for Angela's husband, who came from the back of the house with a large metal pipe in his hand. Men from the house across the street who had been out in their yard also came running and surrounded the car. Angela's husband hit Richard over the head with the pipe, and Richard ran from the car and up Hubbard Street, with more and more neighbors coming out of their house with pipes and bats, chasing him, ready to fight. Angela's husband and a few of the other men caught up to Richard and hit him over the head again and again, bringing him to the ground. I love that this is what happened, and I love that he felt just a tiny bit of what he did to all of those other people. Now, there are many stories of the entire neighborhood beating him while he lay on the ground, and they did to a point, but he wasn't beaten so badly that he was like unconscious or dead, so it really wasn't as bad as they try to make it sound. Mostly what they did is they kept him surrounded until the police came, at which point he admitted to who he was and asked for help, which is fucking ironic as fuck. He was then treated for multiple large wounds on his head and promptly arrested. And that was the official end of the reign of terror of Richard fucking Ramirez. I'm not going to go into the details of the trial, as that's a bit boring to me, and this is already pretty hefty for a part 2. But I will say that there are still a ton of people out there who, despite ballistic, eyewitness, and even DNA evidence, believe Richard Ramirez is innocent of all of these crimes, which is straight up fucking idiotic. Now, a big part of this is because he was good looking, and when in prison, he got his teeth fixed. So women with serious issues became obsessed with him, and he even married after being found guilty of 13 counts of murder, among many other crimes. His trial began in July of 1988 and lasted over a year. Now, one of the reasons for the length of the trial was that one juror was murdered during the trial, but it wasn't related to Richard. It was just totally random. In September 1989, a year and 2 months after the trial began, he was found guilty on 43 charges, including the 13 murder charges, 5 attempted murder, burglary charges, and much, much more. Now, he was in prison from that moment on, and in 1996, he married one of his fucking groupies, Doreen Leoy. She used to say that when he died, she would kill herself because he was sentenced to death. But by 2013, the two were no longer even together, which is fucking shocking. So he was given the death penalty, like I said, which comes with automatic appeals, but all of them were denied. However, he remained in jail until his death from B-cell lymphoma, which is not surprising given all we know about like his childhood and how he grew up and all the toxins and all that. He was 53 years old when he died. God, I cannot fucking speak. I apologize. One thing I wanted to call out that I found really weird, and even more so now that I've read his niece's book, is that when he was sentenced to death, he said, quote, "Big deal. Death always went with the territory. See you in Disneyland." Which I found really strange the first time I heard it. But now maybe I'm thinking it was a callback to a time he was actually happy. You know, because his niece talks about how they went to Disneyland. So I don't know. Who knows and who cares really? Like, fuck this loser. I'm glad he's dead. I'm glad he died young, and I hope it fucking hurt. So that's it. Monster of a case. Sorry for the delay, guys. It was a pain in the ass. It's always a pain in the ass, but I love what I do. I love doing this. I wish I could just do this all day. Just podcast, just research and podcast. But life gets in the way. I apologize for the wait. I'm going to play the Richard Ramirez song at the end of this episode instead of my outro. So thanks for listening. I have quite a few other cases I'm going to do. I'm going to do the Hart family murders. If y'all know that one, it's pretty fucked up. I have a couple more. We'll obviously do the Hillside Strangler at some point. So we'll just have to wait and see what comes up next. But thank you guys so much for tuning in. Please like, rate, review, share with your friends and family. And I'll see ya when I see ya. And until then, stay safe.
What's wrong? You think that I'm joking? If you saw that shit, I swear you'll be choking. and here's why.
Come on, he comes in bright and night. He'll whip out your eyes with a spoon so sleep tight. The sick fuck, you can't argue that. As he wipes his feet on the bloody old mat. Never hit, cross at your lip. He'll clean up the blood with a cold shower in the mud. Well, you think that I'm joking? If you saw that shit, I swear you'd be choking.
I can see you, I can feel you. I gotta have you since I can't be you. I can see you, I can feel you. I gotta have you since I can't be you. I can see you, I can feel you.
You're not alive, no one else can have you. He comes in bright and night. He'll rip out your eyes with a spoon so sleep tight. He's a sick fuck, you can't argue that. He'll wipe his feet on your bloody door mat. As a heat, stares at your lips. He'll clean up the blood with a cold shower in the mud. What's wrong? You think that I'm joking? If you saw that shit, I swear you'd be choking.
Majority, though not all, of these fixed deviants are not merely neurotics, but are actually borderline psychotics.
You may be waiting under your bed, and he's got a big shiny blade. You can't see who he is, you just see his reflection in your mirror, in your nightmares, in your
In your head, he comes in bright and night. He'll rip out your